Chapter 8. Maggie had the distinct feeling that sunrise would find her heart no longer beating. It had withstood so many blows the day before, there was no way it would make it to morning. They had talked a bit longer, but Keith looked beat with a whip, and she didn't feel much better. So, with a simple good night, they had left whatever they were, whatever they might have been, at the threshold of her door. It was hard to get herself going, but she knew there really wasn't a choice. Yes, Keith had been a nice addition to life at the mansion, but that was a dream. Today was back to reality. Quickly, she pulled the red top and blue blazer on. She might not fit here, but at least she could pretend to look like she did. When the limousine pulled up at the front of the mansion, Keith pulled up right behind it in the red Dodge. He wanted the first shot at his dad, if at all possible. "Here, let me get that," taking 3 bags from the driver who was piling them on the driveway. "How was your trip?" "Wonderful," Vivian said. "Great, until the flight home," his father said with characteristic blustering. "Oh, now, Conrad, it was not that bad. Besides, we got it ironed out." "Humph." It was his father's standard comeback in any disagreement with Vivian. "Well, we're glad you're back. We're all still in one piece." Keith opened the front door and stepped back for them to enter. However, even he wasn't prepared for the welcome on the other side. There, standing on the bottom step, stood Maggie, looking like a CEO. A look of sheer determination etched on her face, and both children firmly in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Ayer, Mrs. Ayer. It's great to have you back." With a slight push, she nudged Peter forward to greet them. "Well, aren't you precious this morning?" Vivian said, and she actually bent down to Peter's level. Keith's gaze went from them to Maggie as she descended the last step and leaned toward Vivian so Isabella could go to her mother. Never before had Keith been so awestruck. Her hair was pulled back so that it was a slim cascade down her back rather than in unruly waves around her head. "Oh, and little Isabella, look at you. You grew so much while we were gone." Vivian's arms were around the child, and Isabella squealed in delight. Both Vivian and his father laughed. "Good morning," Patty Ann said staidly as she descended the stairs behind them. All gazes snapped up to her, and the levity evaporated in one whoosh. Vivian gave Isabella back to Maggie and straightened, pulling on her suit jacket. "Hello, Patty Ann. I'm glad to see everything still in place." "Yes, ma'am, it is." The look of disapproval she shot Maggie hit Keith on the ricochet. Maggie was right. Patty Ann was out for her, and unless he did something quick, she-wolf number 1 would rip apart all of Maggie's hard work and leave it in shambles. "Dad, I hate to take you away like this, but we had an issue with feed again. Do you mind?" His father let out a long exhale. 5 minutes back, and already there are problems." "Hey, they didn't take a vacation like you did," Keith said, trying to lighten the mood. "Ma'am," Patty Ann said, "we need to go over this week's schedule." "Of course, Patty Ann," Vivian said. "But let me get settled in first. I smell like airplane." With one more haughty glance at those assembled in the foyer, Patty Ann turned on her heel and marched up the steps. Keith noticed the visible, although only barely, sigh that went through Maggie. She looked over at him, and there was only the slightest of smiles. Then she took Peter's hand. "Come on, Peter. Hashiki will be here for your karate lesson in 15 minutes. The child followed Maggie up the stairs, and Keith felt the weight of his current undertaking fall on his shoulders. "Are we going to do this or not?" his father asked harshly. Pulling every bit of divine guidance to him, Keith turned to follow his father. "Guide me and protect me, Father," he prayed softly. "And Mom, if you're listening up there, I could use all the help I can get here." As he stepped into his father's office, courage came into Keith. He shut the door behind him. "We need to talk, Dad." That's what you said. What's up with the feed situation? Keith shook his head, sat down, and pulled his hat, then his bandana off his head. That can wait. This is more important. Oh? It's about Maggie, Miss Montgomery. His dad sat down with a thump. Uh-oh. It took everything he had not to drop his gaze, but he stayed steady. You need to know that while you were gone, she and I got to talking, and, well, there are some things you need to know about her. His father waved him off. We already know about her background. Vivian and I have talked about it, and we know that her kind are not suitable for employment here. That comment slammed into Keith like a wrecking ball. Her kind? What kind is she, Dad? The scowl of disapproval dropped through his father's features. Oh, you know. You mean that she was a foster kid? That she was bounced around all over the state because every place she went sucked? Is that what you mean by her kind? Look, Keith, I'm sure— No. He held up his index finger. Dad, for once, you are going to listen to me. Hard determination solidified in his chest. Now, she's been through hell and back, through no fault of her own. Do you know why she was in the foster care system? Do you? There was a grunt, but no real reply. I'll tell you why. Because her parents were killed in a car accident, that's why. A car accident, Dad. She was 8 years old, and she was thrown out of the only world she'd ever known, and sent first to one house and then to another, not because she was a bad kid, but because they were temporary solutions to a permanent problem. Look, that's really tragic, Keith. Tragic? Sanity began to tilt sideways. Dad, she didn't lose one parent. She lost both of them. Zap, they were gone, just like that. Like I said, it's tragic. Frustration catapulted him from the chair. Cripes, Dad, you don't get it, do you? He paced over to the wall, and his hand raked across his head. You don't get what something like that does to a kid, and you never have. He spun on the emotions. It changes you, way down inside. It changes you in ways you can't even explain, but it's deep, and it's forever. Keith. And it doesn't go away even if you want it to, even if you wish it to, even if you pray to God to take it away. It doesn't go away. Even if you work hard, if you go to college and get a degree, it's still there. It's there even if you get successful and make $1 bazillion. It still doesn't go away. It's right here. He put his hand, little finger edged into the center of his chest. The breaths were coming in hard, fast gulps of air. Every time you dare to look, it's right there. I know, because I have lived with that pain for the last 17 years. Not that you've noticed. His father's gaze dropped to the desk. And now? You're going to fire her and tell her she's no good, that she's not worthy of this job, just like she hasn't been worth keeping at any place she's been till now? Is that what you would want someone to do to me, Dad? Huh? Is it? Well, let me tell you something. You do that to her, and you are doing it to me. He let his eyes fall closed to corral the emotions because they were starting to jab into him with such force he couldn't control them. When he opened his eyes, it was not her pain, but her caring that he saw. Besides, Dad, you should see her with Pete and Izzy. They love her. They really do. I've seen it. They trust her, and even you have to admit there hasn't been a single other one they've trusted so far, not to even mention loved. He took a long, calming breath. So, if you have the nerve to fire her, the minute she walks out that door, you've just trashed whatever family you have left. Those 2 kids will never be the same, and I'll never be able to have any respect for you again. The words hung in the air, and finally Keith knew he could do no more. Well, I've said what I came to say. He swiped his hat and bandana off the little table and turned to walk out. The door was open before his father said anything. "Keith, wait." He stopped, but he didn't turn. "Look, I know I made some mistakes with you. I know that. I admit that. I should have been there when your mom, well, she was a wonderful woman. When I lost her..." The word stopped. "I'll talk to Vivian. We should at least give Miss Montgomery a chance." He wanted more, so much more, but at this point, skirting an outright firing was a step in the right direction. Slowly, he turned, and the thought went through him that he had never seen that look on his father's face. She deserves that much. All day, Maggie expected that at any moment, someone would walk in the room and expel her permanently. However, karate came and went, lunch came and went, naps, playtime. Each slid by as if the guillotine wasn't hanging over her neck. By dinner, she was careful to have both children in their best clothes, standing in the anteroom to the dining room at 10 until 6. It would have been far less intimidating if she had thought that maybe Keith would be by to eat with them. Of course, that was completely impossible. For reasons she couldn't adequately explain, he did his best to remain as scarce as possible when the others were around. It was only at that moment that she wondered about that. She hadn't seen him all day, save for the few minutes welcoming the Ayers back. Of course, it was for the best. He was engaged, not to mention everything else. It was better if he went on with his life and she went on with hers. All she had to do now was convince her heart of that. "Well, well, this is a surprise," Patty Ann said as she strode over to them to inspect the children. "Did you reset your watch to on time?" Maggie absorbed the barb. "No, ma'am. We just had a little practice at getting it right while you were gone. Trust me, it's well in hand now." "Well." The word was more of a grunt of disapproval. The inspection grated across Maggie's nerves. They didn't deserve to be treated like show animals. "May we go in now before you make us late?" Patty Ann's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Don't patronize me, Miss Montgomery. I could have you fired like that if I so choose." "Really? It must be nice to have so much power. Too bad you don't know how to use it to make life better for anyone." "Patty Ann, are the children here yet?" Mrs. Ayer called from inside the dining room. Without waiting for the secretary to make her customary premiere entrance, Maggie pushed the door open and guided the children in. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ayer. Patty Ann was a little late getting down to make her inspections. I'm sure it won't happen again. Right, Patty Ann?" The two gazes at the table went to the secretary. "No, ma'am," Patty Ann said, with hate dripping from the statement. "It won't happen again." "Here, Peter, give your mommy a kiss," Maggie said, tramping through all the other emotions to get to genuine love for the children. Peter gave Vivian a kiss and then reached his little hands out to the sides for a hug. Taken aback, Vivian glanced up at Maggie. Then she bent and gave him a hug. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "You been back up to the mansion?" Ike asked Friday afternoon when Keith was in the stable office filling out the feeding schedules. "No. Why?" It killed him to say it. In fact, there wasn't a single moment since he'd walked away that he hadn't thought about her, wondered about her, wanted to talk to her to see how things were going. He had stopped Jeffrey for the 411 the day before when the gardener was working on the guest house lawn, Keith's lawn from now until June 3rd. From Jeffrey's account, nothing had changed, no major firings or personnel confrontations, and Keith was pretty sure Jeffrey was tapped into the Inez connection, so he would have known if something major had gone down. Head down, Keith wrote as if nothing in life was more important. "I guess you'll be off this weekend?" Ike asked, although there was more to the question than he let on. "Yeah, I told you that 6 weeks ago, remember? Tanner's coming up early. He'll fill in. If you need more help, you can always call John." So, everything's cool in paradise then? Ike asked, digging still. Of course. Why wouldn't it be? Ike's gaze burrowed into Keith, trying to discern if there was more he wasn't saying. Oh, Keith said, as if he'd just remembered something. And I won't be here at all tomorrow. I'm picking Dallas and her folks up at the airport. How he could get all the way to nonchalance, Keith couldn't tell, but he was doing a pretty good job of sounding nearly together about the whole situation. Well, I'm glad. Ike crossed his arms and leaned on the filing cabinet. Dallas is a wonderful girl. Hey, Keith looked up with a smile. You don't have to sell me on Dallas. I'm marrying her, remember? Ike looked pleased with that answer. I'm glad. I was a little worried there for a while. Worried? Keith smiled. No worries, man. This is the happiest time of my life. He grabbed his keys from the shelf. Gotta go. I'm meeting Greg for drinks. Greg? Uh-oh. Not too heavy on the uptake there. Me? Keith flashed him a grin. I'm a good boy. Yeah, that's what they all say. Ike became very serious. Take it easy, okay? You've got a lot to get done tomorrow. Keith held up his hands. I'll be good, I promise. Everything's ready for tomorrow, Vivian said as they sat at dinner Friday night. The governor's office called. He and his wife will be here. Maggie's fork slowed in her hand. The governor? They didn't mess around. We may have an issue with the press. Patty Ann has security lined up to keep them outside the gates, but you know they always come up with some sneaky plan to get in where they aren't wanted. She glanced at Maggie, but quickly returned her gaze to her husband. We've got florists, caterers, and the photographer. I think everyone's lined up. Good, Mr. Ayer said. Lowell is expecting this to be a great photo op. It may even have national legs, so they're pumping it that way. The wedding definitely will be, and he may even get a little mileage out of the engagement. The roast stuck in Maggie's throat. Very softly, she cleared her throat and turned to fuss with Isabella, who had been eating mashed potatoes with her fists. Oh, baby girl, no, don't do that. The children will need to make an appearance, Vivian said, and Maggie froze. The children, ma'am? Yes, we'd like to have them in the garden for pictures and such, but please keep them from making any scene. We can't have that with a governor here. Oh, of course not, ma'am. The responsibility wrapped around her, squeezing the breath from her lungs. Patty Ann has the next 24 hours planned down to the minute, and I expect that everything should go off perfectly. Maggie didn't answer, as the statement wasn't meant for her, but her heart hurt. It all sounded so scripted. She wondered if Patty Ann had scheduled each kiss, too. Then she snapped that thought in half. How she would ever make it through watching Keith kiss someone else was completely beyond her. Isabella picked that moment to overturn her milk. In the next instant, Maggie was on her feet, mopping up the white substance. I'm sorry, ma'am. We'll just go and let you all finish. She pulled Peter up. Give your mom a kiss. He did as instructed, and then, with his hand firmly in hers, and Isabella planted on her hip, they escaped the suffocating atmosphere of the dining room. If they never had to go back, it would be too soon. Well, it's about time, Greg said when Keith made it to the table at Tony's 30 minutes late, and not happy about anything in life. He wasn't in the best of moods, and it was getting worse by the second. Sorry, I lost track of time. That's a bad habit, you know. Greg eyed him. Dallas is going to have to put a leash on you to get you where she wants you on time. Keith didn't want to talk about Dallas. He didn't want to talk about the party, or the mansion, or the next 2 months. Tonight, he had one goal in mind: forgetting everything. Man, dude, go easy on that stuff, Greg said, when they had been firmly ensconced at Billy Joe's dance hall and bar for 5 hours. His wire-framed glasses set off his preppy look like a picture frame. You got a big day tomorrow. Passing out tonight ain't the best idea in the world." Keith turned alcohol-laden eyes on his friend. "What are you, my babysitter?" Greg's face fell into concern. "What is up with you tonight? I haven't seen you like this since the night your dad got married." "Yeah, well, I guess the joy of being married runs in the family." The worry on Greg's face deepened. "Did you have a fight with Dallas?" "No." He took another drink. "Well, you're gonna have a fight if she finds out about this." "Are you gonna sit there all night and ruin my good time? Or are you gonna try to find you a hot babe to help you drive home?" The displeasure on Greg's face didn't leave. "The way you look, I'm going to have to drive you home." "Oh, yeah, Dad would love that." His body swayed under the weight of the alcohol, which he was adding to by the second. "Hey, remember that time in college when you dropped me off and I passed out on the front lawn? Boy, that was a howl, wasn't it?" Yeah, a howl. Nothing in Greg's voice said he'd enjoyed that episode. Or hey, how about the prom? Remember when I was with, what's her name? Casey. Yeah, Casey. He looked at Greg. Boy, you're good. His train of thought slid away from him. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, Casey. Dang, now she was fine. He took another drink. I wonder whatever happened to her. She's married, 3 kids, upstate. That surprised Keith. Really? Yes, really. Her mom's a friend of my mom. Keith nodded, although he didn't really care. Greg bent his head to catch a glimpse at his watch. Well, it's about that time, brother. How are we going to get you home and tucked in safe and sound? Ache ripped through him, and Keith bowed forward, trying to withstand the thoughts that were flowing through him in disparate directions. He couldn't catch them, not even one. All he knew was that he hurt so bad he just wanted it to stop. Do you think I'm making a mistake? Considering what you have planned for tomorrow, I think this whole idea was a mistake. No, man. Do you think I'm making a mistake with Dallas? Serious concern crowded over Greg's face. Come on, Keith. Listen to yourself. That's crazy. Dallas is the best catch in the state, and you're going to throw her overboard? Dang, man, what has gotten into you? Nothing. Well, I hope nothing disappears by tomorrow, because Dallas will hang you out to dry if you ditch her now. She's not one to toy with, not to mention her dad. Greg shook his head and Mock shivered. He'll fillet you and serve you with dinner if you hurt Dallas. He set his face. No, you've just got a bad case of cold feet, my friend. It will pass, trust me. Once Dallas gets off that plane and she's in your arms again, you'll forget all about second thoughts. Now, we'd better get you home before it's time to get you to the airport. There were so many other things Keith wanted to talk about, so many other things that were twisting through his brain and his spirit. However, Greg didn't stick around to hear them. Instead, he walked off to find something, or someone, or... Keith lost the thought in the sip he took. He'd gotten on this train the minute he'd taken his dad's advice to make it official with Dallas, and there was no getting off now, unless he found a way to forget or to escape. We're here, sir. Sir? The words wound through Keith's brain, fuzzy and incomprehensible. You have to get out of the car, sir. Car. It was something about a car. Keith pulled himself to upright and dragged himself out of the back seat of the car. Swaying dangerously when he was on his feet, he reached for his wallet. What do I owe you? Your friend already took care of it. The driver looked at him skeptically. You be okay getting in? Keith looked up at the stairs that looked 1,000,000 miles high. Yeah, no problem. And then he was standing by himself, not sure of anything other than that he was home. Holding the railing to keep himself moving, he climbed the steps. At the top, He pitched forward to the door. Key. He pulled his keys from his pocket and tried them, one after another. The second time around the key ring, he realized he must have forgotten to bring the right key. Standing there as the world spun in front of his eyes, he reached over and punched the doorbell. There was no sanity left to tell him not to. Over and over he hit it, hoping someone would rescue him before he really did pass out. The door opened, and oblivious to who was standing there, Keith stumbled forward. "Mr. Ayer," Inez said in horror. "What in the world?" "Sorry, I dropped my key." "Key? But—" "Who is it, Inez?" his father called from the top of the stairs. It's Keith, sir." "It's me, Dad." His voice was coated with a slap-happy grin. "Aren't you glad to see me?" By the time his dad made it down the last step, happy was the last word that would have described him. Where have you been?" "Sleeping," he grinned. "Where you think I've been?" Pure, unadulterated anger poured through his father's face until it was red and puffy with it. "Get out!" He pointed back for the door as Inez gasped. "Out?" "Now!" His father turned him around to the door. "You are not welcome here." "But—" "Go home, clean yourself up, and by tomorrow morning you'd better look like tonight never happened." At the door, he gave Keith a push which really wasn't necessary. Somehow his hands caught the railing as he stumbled down the stairs. "But, Dad—" "Good night, Keith." And his dad shut the door. On the first sound of the doorbell, Maggie had come full awake. There was always uneasiness about sleeping in the mansion. The kids could wake up, and she wouldn't hear them before someone else did. Someone could come in. She was never really sure why, but she had slept lighter here than at any place she'd ever laid her head. With one swipe, she had her button-down shirt from the day before over her, and at the door she quietly let herself out. There were voices down the hall, and when she heard Mr. Ayer's, she pressed herself into the space next to the wall cabinet. "What is it, Conrad? Who was there?" Vivian asked from next to the staircase. "My idiotic son." "Keith? What's wrong with him?" "He's drunk. Imagine that." He let a string of cuss words follow that statement as Maggie closed her eyes and willed this night to go away. Tears stained her heart and spirit as her thoughts went to him. Vivian sounded almost as panicked as Maggie felt. "Did he leave?" "Leave? I threw his butt out." Mr. Ayer muttered a few more choice words. "He's enough of a headache when he's stone-cold sober." No, this night hadn't been good from minute one, and it was getting worse. "What about tomorrow?" Vivian asked with fear. "Well, I would tell you to ask him, but I don't think he could tell you his birth date, much less anything really important right now." "But the Hendersons? He's supposed to pick them up at 1. And what about Dallas? She can't see him like that. It will ruin everything." "You don't think I know that?" The low rumble of a guttural growl filled the expanse of space. "I knew it. I knew he would find a way to mess this up, pulling something like this tonight, of all nights. The only way this could be worse is if he had done it tomorrow night." "Oh, don't even say that." "As important as this is, there was no way he was going to not screw it up." Vivian sighed. "Maybe he'll be better by morning." "Yeah, and maybe the sun will rise in the west." Their voices trailed off down the hallway, and Maggie stood, fixed in place. He was out there, by himself, hurting, and it was knifing into her spirit that his father didn't care more than how that affected his political connections. It was the craziest thing she had ever even considered in her life, but her heart wouldn't let her go back to bed. If they caught her, she would be out. But if she didn't go, she would never be able to live with herself. Quietly, she eased to Isabella's door and peered inside, sleeping as usual. Then she opened Peter's. How they could sleep through the racket of the doorbell, she had no idea, but she was grateful they had. When Peter's door was closed, Maggie took a moment to close her eyes. God, help. This is crazy, but I can't leave him out there, not like that. On cat feet, she went down the kitchen stairs. The door just off the side of the kitchen was her best bet. It would let her right out near the trail. Then she could go up front and see if he was still there. There wasn't even a squeak as she let herself out. It took more than a moment for her eyes to adjust to the darkness. It was, after all, nearly 3 in the morning. Praying for each footfall, she pushed through the trees to the trail and met Keith's stumbling descent full on. "Keith." "What? Huh?" He barely got stopped, and even when he did, he was still swaying. "It's me, Maggie." She took one look at him and knew it was bad. He was wasted, but more than that, his eyes were stained with tears and falling closed with each word he managed to slur out. "Maggie, what are you doing out here?" "Well, I would ask you the same question, except I think I know. You need help getting home?" He laughed. "Oh, you know me. I don't have a home. I'm just traveling through." "Through, huh? Well, you want some company while you travel?" He looked at her with sad, sullen eyes. "Why are you being nice to me? You should be back in there with the rest of them." "We're friends, remember?" She wished with everything in her that she knew Ike's number. He would know what to do. He would know how to get Keith somewhere safe. But she didn't know Ike's number, so she said a prayer that her best would be good enough. "So, which way is your place?" "That way." He pointed an unsteady finger down the trail. "The guest house. Isn't that what they call it? Yeah, the guest house." He laughed. "Funny, how long have I been a guest here? You'd think they'd have started calling it Keith's place by now. But then, that would mean they wanted me to stay, which of course they don't." Maggie sucked in a long breath. So he wasn't doing work at the guest house that first day. Well, that was about par for how smart she had been about everything else. "Come on, let's get you home." It had been the longest walk of her life. All the way, Keith kept asking why she was being so nice and telling her how he didn't have a home and how he should have known his father would yell. He was one of the most pathetic individuals she had ever seen, and the others in the running she really didn't want to think about. The only good thing was he had actually managed to stay on his feet the whole way, which was a blessing considering she couldn't have dragged him 2 inches if she had to. At the guest house, he reached under the front flower pot and produced the key. By now, her body temperature had dropped to below freezing, and she stood on his front porch, hopping from foot to stay warm. The door finally gave, and mercifully, he stepped in. She followed him right to the living room, where he fell onto the couch, landing with one leg still trailing behind him. He was home. He was safe. This was none of her business. She tried to tell herself just to leave. She had done more than she should have. Still, if she just left, tomorrow could ruin his life for good. Not that he didn't deserve it after this little stunt, but still, she didn't want to see his life ruined as hers had been by a night out partying. That was too much responsibility to put on any night. She went into the kitchen, found the phone and the little list of numbers taped to the cabinet. There was only one she recognized. It took a long breath to get herself calm enough to dial the number, and it took another one not to hang up. Finally, thankfully, someone picked up. "Hello?" He was asleep, and Maggie's courage nearly failed her again. "Ike?" "Yeah?" "This is Maggie. Listen, Keith's in trouble."
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.
This has been Deep in the Heart, written by Staci Stallings. Narrated by Becky Dowdy of Brave Hearts Audiobook Productions. Copyright 2010 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.